This is Progress Canada, presented by Lightbulb Narrative. Okay, so we are back for another episode of the Wrap Up Ontario because we are focusing on the Ontario Liberal Party leadership race, which finally had something happen, which was a debate. The candidate deadline, of course, was just a few days back, and now they have had their first official debate. So we thought, hey, why not provide an update at this point? Because we haven't talked about it in months, because of course this is a massively long process that we are still somehow only halfway through. So what we're going to focus on today is the state of the race at the halfway point here. We're going to talk about the candidates and their performances so far, including at the debate last night. And then we're going to finish off talking about the drive to sign up new members before the September 7th deadline. It's a later deadline for the student clubs, but September will be the next phase of the race that we're moving towards. Before we get going, as a refresher, since we haven't been here in a while, maybe we'll give some panel self-introductions again. Daryl, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. My name is Daryl. I'm the former digital and creative director for the Liberal Party of Canada, as well as a former advisor to Prime Minister Trudeau. I've also worked in campaigns and on political parties across the country. Now I continue to do that as a freelance digital and creative communications specialist.
And I'm Jordan Ray. I'm an account director for strategy and public affairs with Curious Public. We focus on helping clients find out what their story is and telling it to their key audiences. I do a lot of strategy work, a lot of writing. Used to work for the Ontario Liberal Party with Daryl and Teresa as the communications and organizing lead there in 2018 to 2020 during the first of the third party era leadership races.
Well, isn't that indicative of how things are going? And I'm, of course, your friendly neighborhood podcast host. I host all of these episodes. Teresa Lubowitz, I'm the former communications coordinator and digital fundraising lead for the Ontario Liberal Party, former director of communications for the deputy premier, and a former speechwriter for Premier Wynne as well. So we all have a lot of background, particularly in this party, in addition to politics and communications and digital, more broadly speaking. So as promised, we're going to be talking about the state of the race so far. So just as a recap, the race started technically on February 9th. However, constitutionally, it started July 3rd. This was really just to get around some of the rules that the party has for itself. The candidate nomination deadline did end July 31st, which was fairly recently. We did technically have six candidates at that time. One of them has dropped out since then, and we are now back down to 5 candidates. Membership deadline, again, as I said, September 7th. It's going to be September 25th for student clubs, just to give them some time to get back to campus and organize. Online voting in the race is going to take place from November 9th to November 20th, with the leader announcement on November 21st. So as you can see, a very, very, very long race, which we are just finding so thrilling in terms of what's been going on in it.
So great.
We are, of course, hoping that stuff will start to pick up now that the candidate deadline has passed and we're really getting towards the membership deadline. A couple notes: there are federal by-elections happening on August 31st and provincial by-elections happening on September 3rd. So those are both the week of the membership deadline, which I think will be interesting from an organizing standpoint. So let's just get into our first question. We're just like going through our paces much faster than we normally do. We'll see how much we slow it down through discussion. But for our first question, we want to talk about the state of the race. So again, the race is already more than half over. How would you rate the contest so far in terms of interest, excitement, and the renewal it has sparked or not? Daryl, maybe we can start with you.
Well, I'll be definitely arguing for the or not question. It's yeah, I mean, we kind of predicted this when we talked about this back in February, right? Like, we knew it was going to be a bit of excitement as individual candidates came online, and then it was going to be the summer and no one was going to care. I saw some jokes last night. Are you watching the leadership debate? No, I'm out at the pool or drinking a beer like you should be. So, this is kind of what we might want to expect. That said, I mean, that's maybe not so generous description of how I'm feeling, but I mean, if we want to talk about specifics, we're not really seeing change in the polls. Doug Ford took a hit during some of the scandals that just happened. None of them were able to capitalize on that. Even last night, they barely were able to really make that a focus. And the PCs are rebounding. So it's certainly not generating, waves on that side of things. Like I said, not a lot of people even really paying attention right now. And today, looking at like the news coverage that came out of the debate, the biggest thing that people had to talk about was the fact that one of the first questions the candidates talked about whether they should have a seat or not. And that was the biggest thing that came out. And that obviously because it drives the narrative of Nav as the front runner going up against some others who do have seats. And if that's the most interesting thing to come out of the debate, it's not good news for the race as a whole. So I think generally, in terms of the things you pointed out, interest, excitement, renewal, I haven't seen it. I do hope that there's a lot more happening on the ground, on individuals. Like they talked a lot about their tours. So, how that's actually kind of coming across in the ridings, in these areas where they're speaking to people directly. But as far as what I'm seeing, from an online perspective, it really hasn't generated a lot of excitement.
Jordan?
Yeah, I think it's been pretty quiet since the end of what I think was the last biggest news piece in this leadership cycle, which was the Scarborough Southwest by-election nomination, which of course Nader Erskine-Smith, who was running, was part of that nomination. He did not win, he withdrew, and since then it's been practically crickets. I think I was thinking about, the state of the race, and one positive to note is that in the past, we've always had the debates, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, after the membership cutoff. So this is
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
This is the first race I can remember where we've actually given members a chance to, kick the tires on the candidates before they take out a membership, which I think is really positive this time. But because the race was quiet, we had those couple last minute entries. We had Stephanie Bowman jump in at the last minute. We had Birker Mahanda jump in at the last minute and then withdraw 7 days later. But to Daryl's point, none of it's really punching through for regular people. It's a longer race, also to Daryl's point, it's summertime, and there's a lot of bigger stories that are competing for people's attention, like wildfires, Trump, separatism. So by comparison, like who's going to lead the third party in the legislature in Ontario doesn't really seem to be that important.
It's a bit of, I don't know how you want to frame it, like a tree falls in the forest or Schrodinger's liberal race. Like if no one notices it's happening, is it like, do we have any proof of life on this race? Like that's sort of where I'm at on it. Like my biggest takeaway so far is just the complete lack of substance to this race. Now I will give Eric his props in that he did release a massive platform and put some ideas out there, and he put them out there saying, hey, I'm not necessarily locked in on these ideas. They're just where I'm at right now. And if you think we should push back on some of them or go heavier on others, happy to do that kind of thing. I don't necessarily agree with everything he's put forward, but I do appreciate someone actually saying, hey, how about we actually talk about something here? Because a lot of these leadership races are very vibes based, very like, oh, do you like that person? And I do fully get and agree that most people do vote on who they think will make the decisions they would in their shoes and who they feel comfortable with and who they feel shares their values. All of that is true. But I think you actually have to spell out some of those values. Like just saying, hey, I'm going to fix education that does nothing for me. That does nothing for anybody, actually. That just says, hey, what I'm really interested in here is furthering my political career. And I think we already have an example in the current government of Doug Ford, of a lot of those kinds of types of people. And if you want to replace that type of government, I think you have to show some substance. I think you have to show there's a reason why you're running for office. I don't think you can say, hey, I'm just here, please vote for me. And I think at this point, I have a policy tracker that I put forward all the time on these races, and it is super empty. And it's kind of funny because in past races, some of the teams will go, oh, look at all these things Teresa's put out. We should probably fill some of those. And no such rush this time from the candidates, which is fine. I'm not trying to be self-important, but like the idea being, hey, these are the things that if you're a premier, you're actually going to have to give a fuck about. You're actually going to have to come up with some answers. And right now, the race seems very focused on Doug Ford bad, Liberals good, and that's not enough for people. We know he's bad. I think most people know the ways that he's hurting this province. There's not a lot of prescriptions for solutions here. Yeah. And I think if you want to get elected, you have to have at least a handful of things that you can point to and say, this is a priority for me and I know how to get it done. And I'm not seeing that from any of the candidates. And we'll get into this later, but I have the biggest frustration for, at least Stephanie entered the race only about a week and a half ago, so we can forgive her for not having all of her details figured out. But Nav Baines has been out there for a pretty long time and has the least amount of policy of anyone. I think he had basically like 3 concrete policies in his vision statement, and his vision statement reads as generically as humanly possible. Like, I don't think I've seen a less detailed statement of priorities from a candidate in politics. I might be being a bit harsh here. Like, there's probably ones who haven't put out anything, but like, this is functionally putting out nothing. And maybe I would have fewer hackles about it, but then, as candidates try and spin the results of the debate afterwards, his team put out one from him saying like, oh, I was so detailed. And I was like, where are the details in the room with us? Right. Like that kind of thing. So, it's not just him, it is all of them. I think they need to actually step up and show their vision, show there's a reason they're running for office other than their own careers. And until they do that, I don't know that anyone's going to give a second look to the Liberals. You need that specificity to say, hey, we are not only different from Ford, we are up to the job and ready to get going because we have a plan in place. And the bigger component to that is, until you do that, you also don't create enough distance with the NDP to replace the PCs. You continue to get the vote splitting we've seen in a number of ridings that are how the PCs have squeaked into victory each of these times. So I don't think they are showing they are doing enough. And I actually want to send it to you guys too. Before we move into the debate, this phase to me, I get that the campaigns are focused on driving memberships now. Like, they focus on fundraising out of the gate. They use that to do their touring, and now they're trying to drive memberships. But like, here's an idea. Put some ideas out there to get people interested in the fucking party and your candidacy. Like, I'm really shocked at the lack of trying to bring in new members. This seems very, very focused on just rounding up the usual suspects in the party, which turns out are not enough to put us in government. I don't know how you guys feel about that.
Well, we've talked about how this kind of like generic comms is such a problem, especially with Liberals in Canada. Like, we're kind of obsessed with this like to say nothing kind of comms, and this leadership race really just epitomizes that. To your point, Teresa, we haven't really seen a whole lot of anything come out. It's all just like, I want to grow the economy and fix healthcare. It's like, girl, okay, cool. That's a great idea. But like, how do you expect to accomplish such a gargantuan task? So that's one thing that's like really frustrating. And then like, also to Jordan's point earlier, there's like a lot of these big stories that are happening. There are opportunities to get in and say something of import on the wildfires that were affecting Ontario and how that impacted the relationship with the US, or the stuff with Trump and trade and this. And I'm not saying that these people need to have like, they're not the government. They don't have that ability, but they could at least talk about what they would do and why they would do it and why they think it's important. So there are opportunities to insert themselves into the conversations that are happening, but it really doesn't seem like they are. They're just kind of saying, I want to do all the things that Liberals always say they want to do, but how are you specifically going to achieve that? And we saw a little bit of that last night, but like, it was still a lot of the same.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, Daryl, I think the political landscape has changed a bit from what used to work. In particular, after Trump's election, I think a lot of the landscape has shifted in terms of, okay, like, you may have, an authentic story or slick socials or whatever it is that makes you look like you've got your act together. But more and more, I think people aren't looking for the 400-page policy document, but they're looking for enough specifics for them to say, okay, I think that would make a difference in my life. And unless you can staple down your vision with a couple of things like that, then there's nothing to really hold you to once you're leader. And if there's nothing to hold you to, how can there be accountability?
The other thing that bothers me, and not just because it was my advice being ignored, but
I kind of think it might have been, Teresa.
not to suggest, but no, when I first talked to all the candidates, what I have said to them for multiple races now is that they should come up with an accountability package. And my reasoning was, if you come up with an accountability package right out of the gate, anytime Ford does some fucked up shit, you can sweep it into there and say, yeah, I wouldn't do that, and here's how I clean it up. Anyways, pivot back to how I'd fix healthcare and education and put the agenda back on our terms as a party. And none of them have done that. But the reason it really bothers me, other than it being tactically smart, I think, not to toot my own horn, but beyond that, is that it's really low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
He has so many scandals. It would not be difficult to say, hey, we'd roll that back. We wouldn't do that anymore. And there was a question during the debate of, like, what's the waste you would cut? And I think two of the candidates actually did mention the ads, for example. So ads are something, procurement is something, legislation on privacy, access to information, things like that. And I know Lee has done some stuff on that. And some of the candidates have said a little bit on those things, but this is a really easy thing out of the gate. And I know the teams are busy with organizing and all that kind of stuff, and they don't necessarily care about this. But if you want to prove to voters, again, that you have their back, that you are not going to be the same. This is a really important difference that the Peterson government made. They came out with a lot of accountability measures and open government measures right out of the gate to show they were not the tired old Tories who had been rewarding their friends for 40 years, right? Like, it was really... People think politicians are all slime. So you have to go above and beyond to show, actually, we are different. And you can't do that without actually putting some of these ideas in the window. And it seems to me that, like, this seems really obvious and should be something that isn't that time consuming to put together. It's something you can build on once you get to a general campaign. But, like, you should be able to come up with 5 ideas about accountability about this government. And just none of them are really doing it. We want to talk about the candidates themselves, and we're going to sort of frame it in the debate. A lot of my thoughts aren't really related to the debate because, quite honestly, at this point, do I like debates? I don't think I do.
No.
Every time I tune into one, I'm like, I do not care about this. And, really around the halfway mark, I'm, Jordan's texting, oh, did you hear that? I'm like, nope, stop listening. So, I may not be the most reliable reviewer of debates, but, part of it too is we've heard so many of them that we don't really care. And at this point, I don't know how much they actually said in it, but having prefaced it with all of that, we do want to sort of have a review of how the individual candidates are doing so far. So again, the first debate gave us a much closer look at each of the candidates, one-on-one, but also in comparison to each other, even though I think, some people would like more direct communication between the candidates on the stage. I don't think you usually get that in a first debate anyway. We'll see it in later debates if that's true. But again, we have months to go still. What do you think of the candidates' performance so far? Daryl, I guess we're going to you again first.
Before I get into the candidates, I will say, on the debate itself, I think I agree. I think the format is tired, especially in today's world. It just doesn't really work anymore. I did, however, really appreciate the kind of rapid fire questions that the moderator did, the finish the sentence.
Yeah, Tina,
that's a great way to get them to think on their feet, because we even saw they would ask a question in the education bucket that was quite specific about something, and then none of them actually answered the question. They just gave their prepared answer on education. So it was a really interesting way to get them to kind of think outside the box. And those were kind of the best answers, or the best questions that we saw. Specifically the one where she asked, what do the PCs do right that the OLP does not? That's a great question. It's on the thing, what do you think? This is real leadership kind of stuff, macro, what is the big picture?
Well, it's also, have you thought about this versus what has your team
exactly
you, right?
Great point. And then on to the candidates. I mean, I don't really have anything specific about each of them individually. I thought that generally there was certainly a lack of that charisma and that passion that we've talked about previously that was missing from previous leaders, Bonnie and Stephen. And ultimately, I still didn't see that last night. We saw a glimpse of it a little bit. And I think there's also they're nervous. This is their first time, but when you're running to be leader of a party in a big province like Ontario, being TV ready and being able to stand up and answer questions confidently and with charisma is going to be part of it. There's going to be a significant portion of the electorate that are really only going to see a few clips. And if they're not good, then, where are you going to go with that? So I think that they all really have some work to do there. And then again, as I mentioned before, it's just like, we really didn't hear any kind of specificity or even anything like outside of what we've heard ad nauseum for the past however many years. Like, nothing was new. There was no real fight. There's no real detail on what they were doing. Obviously, as you mentioned, Teresa, Eric had a bit of pieces that he put out there, but generally it was all very like, we got to fix this mess that Doug Ford made. But like, again, where's the fight? Where are the details? What are you actually looking to accomplish here? Other than just like be the leader and then be the premier, which is
when you were saying that, I was thinking like, it's essentially this debate could have been an email.
Yeah, it could have been.
Doug Ford
And I
bad.
mean,
Okay.
Doug Ford bad. We need to build a strong economy. That was
Cool.
the headline from the from the debate. Now, I think that there's like a lot of ways to make a debate better. Like you mentioned, I think the specific them talking to each other or even rebutting what the other said. We didn't hear any of that. Nobody disagreed with anyone else on stage last night. And obviously these are liberals debating liberals, and no one wants to become, the line from the PC saying, well, even they don't like each other, or like whatever that might be. But you still have to be able to stand up and say why you're the better person and why you will do a better job than the other people on stage. That just has to be part of your pitch. Or, as far as I'm concerned, you don't have a pitch. So that's kind of where I'm sitting right now. Again, I think they have a lot of work to do. I think they have a lot of kind of things to figure out, and a lot of messages that they have to get out to Ontarians that they so far have not been able to do.
Jordan?
Yeah, I've been thinking about kind of where we're going in this, which eventually will lead to a general election against Doug Ford, we think, right? Especially if he's on the rebounds now,
or someone else.
Yeah, or someone else, right? So one of the things I was paying attention to last night was, what are the candidates saying about Doug, and then what are they saying about themselves in contrast to that? And I think that, because ultimately that is the choice the voter is making when they're in that ballot box, right? Is unless they're voting locally, which happens, for whatever's smaller percentage of voters in that riding. But most people vote on party and leader, right? So it's like, okay, what's option A? What's option B? And also, you need to think ahead about what they're going to be saying about you. Now, we don't know what they're going to be saying about us. We can make some educated guesses, but we did hear some of what we're saying about Ford last night. I won't go through what the candidates are saying about themselves, because it's a little here and there. Stephanie just jumped in, but we heard some good stuff about like the main Ford attack lines last night. So like starting with Nav, the deal is broken and Ford's responsible for it, and I'm going to fix it. So that's the basic thing from Nav. Stephanie, he's
before you go on, since you're focusing on messaging, because I'm focusing on some other things in my answer, but yeah, we've talked about this deal is broken thing. And before you talk about the others, I want to talk about that because, as you know, I hate the deal is broken. Also, because I don't think it's just Ford that broke it. Like, I'm now 40. I am now 40. And I think the deal that, say, millennials has been broken since, around 9/11, and certainly the Great Recession. And this is not just a Ford problem. Now, he has made it way fucking worse, of course. But I don't think it's an accurate statement. I don't know if anybody necessarily believes that it's true specifically because of this government. And I think it's an argument that politicians have been saying. Again, my problem with this campaign so far, Nav's campaign specifically, is just like the lack of any originality or detail to it. And to me, this sort of feeds into that again of like, the deal is broken. And we've been hearing that we've heard that from Trump like 10 years ago, right? Like in much more vulgar terms, but like this is essentially the argument we've heard. And at a certain point, I'm like, what even is the deal? Are we ever going to restore some kind of deal like this? Like, I just think it doesn't, I don't think it actually reflects just like reality going towards 2030 kind of thing. Maybe I'm just venting, but I don't know if you or Daryl have thoughts on that either. I don't love it as a frame.
Yeah, I think there's, like, you raise an important point, which is that it's not a specific to Doug thing. And there's some, there's some mud on our own jersey on this one, right? Because we were in power for 15 years provincially. And like housing, like we are partially to blame for, right? Long-term care, we are partially to blame for. And I think if you look at, in the US, some of the more compelling candidates you've seen are certainly on the progressive side, are candidates who have said, yeah, we didn't get everything right. We got these specific things wrong and it made things worse. And that, because when you're, people are like, yeah, the deal is broken and I haven't trusted government for 30 years. You really need to do a lot of work to rebuild people's trust, not only in your ability to fix it, but in the ability of the system to be fixed, period.
Well, I think like we've talked about this on our international panel, and Andy Burnham talking about how the deal's been broken for 40 years. And when I think of people my age, Daryl's age, we're the old people here. Yeah. When I think of us, I think of like, we have never had the adulthood that was promised to us or reflected in generations that came before us. And when it comes to NAV specifically, I think it's an interesting narrative because it's like, oh, did the deal break post 2021 when you left federal cabinet, but Ford was still like, I think it's a little complicated to say, oh yeah, no, it broke in the last 5 years. No, it broke well before then for many, many people. And it just feels dishonest to me.
And it kind of goes back to this idea that it's hard to name the problem. Like saying that the deal is broken and it's all Doug's Ford fault, Teresa, as you point out, is just malarkey. But point to what are the parts that is broken and why is it broken? Hypercapitalism, there's lots of things you can point to, but then you might piss off the donor class, or you might do this, right? And I think this is again where we kind of sit in this middle. They talked a lot last night about being pragmatic, which is what drew me to, liberal politics in the first place, is this idea that you can kind of pull from what makes sense and address issues in a kind of technocratic way. But to do that, you have to first be able to point to what the problem is so that you can come up with solutions, as opposed to just saying, oh, well, it's Doug Ford's fault. And if he's gone, then, everything will go back to sunshine and rainbow.
Yeah. And I do think the deal is broken is particularly a difficult narrative to put forward if you are functionally the establishment candidate. Now, we can have debates about what establishment means in the party, in society, but I think when, you have a lot of the federal apparatus pushing behind you in your campaign, we are seeing a bit of a federal provincial split here happening. When you have that whole apparatus working for you, the deal is broken is a bit tricky. When you've been in federal cabinet for quite a while, when you were a former very senior executive in one of our major corporations in the country, right? Like I don't know that it's a good match. And to your point, Daryl, without the specificity, it's basically saying, I'm going to latch onto this messaging that I've seen is working for other people. And I don't actually have any details of what that means in practice, because again, I'm pretty comfortable and this hasn't really applied to me in any kind of real way. And anyways, I am dumping on him quite a bit, but it's just because I think narrative only works if the messenger actually really makes sense for that narrative you've chosen. And I don't know that those two things mesh there. But before I spend the whole episode on that, Jordan, continue.
No, yeah, and I we probably don't have enough time to go through everyone, but I think overall that's a good piece of feedback for all of the candidates, is that you have to get the diagnosis right, like what the why is it broken part is really important, because if you don't get people's heads nodding on that, then you won't get them to trust you to begin with.
And it's even like, it's not even really that complicated. Like, it doesn't have to be like specific policy descriptions. Like, think about healthcare, for example. It's broken because of chronic underfunding for decades, and we need to spend a fuck ton of money to fix healthcare. Where's like that's the problem. There's no problem outside of that. Like, we need more money for hospitals, for doctors, for nurses, for support staff, all of these people. It's more money so we can hire more people. That is the problem. And whatever you can find efficiencies, you can find, of course, those are going to help around the edges, but where it's going to be restructuring the budget to have a bunch more money for healthcare. And no one says that. They just talk about
creative hospital funding.
It's just,
right? Like
it's just,
that's what doing,
where is this coming from? It's not
right.
And this is, I think, why, especially, Teresa, you pointed to us elder millennials. It's so frustrating because this is the thing. It's like, just say what you need. Just say what the problem is and talk about why we need to fix it moving forward. I don't care who did it in the past. It literally is irrelevant who caused the problem before. If you're running to be leader of a new party or of the party and bring renewal, then just say it and move on with what you think your solutions are going to be. I mean, this is, again, my opinion, but I think that, like, that's what's so most frustrating to me. It's just all this, like, mamby-pamby, whatever, that's going to do shit all. It's not going to fix anything. And not in a concrete way that's not just, like, kicking the can down the road a little bit.
I agree. I think voters are very much, what have you done for me lately? And I think they also, I think they think everybody fucks up in government and is part of the problem. So, like, whatever happened before, like, if you were directly involved in it, that might be a bit of a different conversation, as some of these people do have some baggage that way. But for the most part, they're like, okay, but what about going forward? I am struggling now, like, whatever happened. And part of that too, like, you talk about hospital funding. Yeah, that money's been spent or wasted or wherever, sent off to various private clinics, whatever it is. The needs are still there. So people want to know what you're doing next. And we're at a point where it's a gift. Ford's team is basically telling hospitals, okay, deal with your deficits through creative financing and firing nurses and whatever it is, which we saw under Harris as well. If he's doing that, you got to talk about how important it is to invest in healthcare. And to your point, Daryl, like, we've known the population of boomers was aging this whole time, and we're going to need this healthcare for 30 years. We've known that. So why has nobody addressed that? Why have we talked about, like, even, in the Winnemagenti governments, we talked about spending the smallest per capita of any province on healthcare. That is actually appalling. That is not something to be proud of. We are the biggest province. We should actually be making sure we're spending robustly on healthcare. And we've gone through a pandemic, which has been a mass disabling event as well. And we're not talking about the cost of healthcare for that. So again, like, where is that conversation, including from Lee, who's from the hospital sector? Like, why are we not talking about those things in much more detail? Again, stepping on Jordan's answers, but go ahead.
Sorry, Jordan.
It's all right. Sometimes I need to be cut off.
I'm just using you now as a candidate by candidate thing, and we'll just do each of them that way, and you can lead.
Well, I mean, if we're talking about candidate performance at the debate specifically, if I'm a general voter and I'm looking at that performance and I'm looking for someone who's going to take on Doug, I really only saw, without even going to, like, for sure choices, 3 potential choices on stage last night, in terms of their presentation and their energy and the way that they went after Doug. And it's Lee, and it's Stephanie, and it's Dylan, in my view. They all, landed some hits on the premier, some better, some worse. But overall, like, there was some energy and some, importantly, some opposition energy to their attacks, which they're going to need for the next couple of years, because they are in opposition until maybe 2029, maybe 2028 is when the next election is going to be. But people are looking for someone who can take on Doug because his negatives are so low. And I didn't really, Eric's talking about reaching out to conservatives and, like, bringing them into the party. Like, great, but we still have a job to do, which is, like, take on Doug. That's great. And Nav was criticizing the premier as well, but it was really flat. And I did not feel a sense of urgency from him in tackling these problems, which is not great from the presumed front runner.
Honestly, Nav's campaign, I just feel is maybe, I don't know if it's him, I don't know if it's his team, and like these are people I really, really respect as well. To be clear, these are good friends of mine who I've worked with in the past who are very, very talented individuals. They're also all organization people, though, who are clearly focused on the organizing side of this. And perhaps they will win anyway that way. But I think they are missing the messaging side of this. I think they are missing the I don't know what to call it, like the heart and the meaning side of converting people. It is not just talking to them and having good vibes. It's actually convincing people you are the right choice and have the same values as them. And I don't think just being like, oh, he's a liberal. Well, so is everyone else on that stage, in theory. So, we can have some debates about that. But for the most part, in theory, they've all declared as liberals and they are there. So that doesn't really do it for me. I've taken a bit of a pro-con approach to all of these candidates. And some of them have similar cons. For example, I think both Nav and Dylan have the con of baggage. They are part of previous administrations that people will have some opinions about. They may want to turn the page on that. Historically, you look at Peterson and McGuinty, those two guys themselves didn't have ties to previous administrations. They did have cabinet ministers who did, of course, but they themselves, as the candidate, as the brand, didn't have ties to the past and were completely forward looking. And these two folks, while they get experience from that, they also get the baggage that goes with it. And we know how people can feel about that. We have Nav, we have Dylan, we have Eric. None of them have seats. So this is the other question. And as you mentioned, Daryl, this was the focus of the news: who has seats, who doesn't, whether or not that matters. I personally have never given a shit about that. I think it's better to just be out in communities. However, you do get a bit more media attention by actually sitting in the House, because they do like to cover the horse race, and that's where it's happening in between elections. So there is some value to having a seat. So it's not an incorrect point, though I do think, and I didn't write it down and I should have, Dylan had a really good rebuttal on that.
He really did.
Watched the debate, right? I don't know if you remember what it was. Do you remember what he said?
If you could go and scrum in the lobby, if you wanted to, like, you just have to be there. You just have to put yourself in the situation, and you'll get scrum if you're the leader of the party. The one thing I think it does limit your ability to like specifically respond to what the government is doing. But I don't think that is hyper important in 2026. I think that, getting the little thing in the article that said, like, the liberal leader said this is one thing, is to keep you in the conversation. But I think being able to like interact with people and connect with people and really kind of drive that emotional side of things is what is needed. And that's not going to happen by sitting in Queen's Park.
And my point with that has always been that it has never done anything for the NDP. And so, like, that's the first point of it. And I think, again, to your point, like, Daryl, like, I think it's better to be out there in person. And you're right, they do just quote the liberal leader. And the main thing is, like, nobody is sitting there watching the legislative channel. Like, I do know people who do, but like, the average Ontarian is not sitting there watching that. They're not even necessarily watching the clips. Like, you can do the Polyev style, clip everything that you're doing in the House and then post that everywhere, sure. But what's just as effective? Showing you actually talking to human beings out and about, which, not to slag on Nav again, but a lot of his out and about stuff has been him just sitting on his own, which I think, again, you want to show these people with people surrounding them all the time. And that's the vibe. And you don't get that in the House. So there's the seat thing. There's the policy piece, again, with the lack of vision. Lee has put out a number of stuff. Her agriculture policy, which I don't have in full on our tracker, but she has quite a bit of agriculture policy. Most of them have done a little bit on the north, at least, because, traditionally all these campaigns, the first thing they do is go north and do a northern tour and yada, yada, to show they care, and then they don't go back. So we'll see if any of them actually return. But, so most of them have something on that front, but for the most part, they have very little that they've actually put out there in any concrete way, which is kind of shocking to me, again, because there's a lot of very experienced organizers, some who have worked in some of these ministries in the past, who should have some ideas about what the next thing is that you do. I was talking to our former premier recently, and that former premier suggested it doesn't even necessarily have to be a new idea. Dust off something we did before and just frame it as a new thing. Like, you don't have to tie it to past governments, but like, not everything we did was bad. You can bring some of that stuff back and actually start talking about doing it.
If you'll allow me, Teresa, we've talked a lot about we've talked a lot about, the leadership contestants and like their comments about Doug Ford and their contrast with the PCs. But like looking at the current polling and like where we're sitting at, like differentiation for the NDP is going to be just as important, if not more important.
Yes, which is something I'm always saying.
Because honestly, if all you're doing is slagging Doug and you're not kind of putting forward something else, why isn't Merritt Stiles, who is the leader and is already doing it and is learning how to do it really well and engaging online really well,
is actually really likable.
Why isn't she then you have to kind of be able to then say like, why me? And I definitely didn't hear that at all from anyone last night, really yet in this race.
To jump on the why me too, this was another point I had of tying a couple of the candidates together. Both Stephanie and Nav. Nav didn't come into the race too late, but he did come in after he might have otherwise come in, because both Stephanie and Nav were either supporting or getting out of the way of somebody else prior to launching. So with Nav, it was Mike Crowley. As soon as Mike Crowley stepped out of the way, Nav suddenly decided he was going to run. With Stephanie, it was Rob Serjanik, who of course she had endorsed and who has now endorsed her. And what I see when I see that is somebody who didn't think they were the right person for the job at this time, or maybe they didn't think it was the right time for them, but suddenly it now is. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with that, other than I think you didn't have a plan for this, or you didn't think you were the right person, so why should we, right? And that is probably pretty inside baseball, and very few people will know that or care about that. But to me, it makes me think, okay, you're doing this because you want to do the role. I want you to do this because you believe you're the right person and you have the right ideas that we actually need as a province right now. And the less specificity I see in your plan, the more I see you as a career politician type versus somebody who's trying to affect change in the province. And that may be fair or unfair, but that has always been how I felt, because until you're actually showing me like, here are the 5 things I really care about, they're why I got into politics, and this is the way I'm actually going to get them done in reality, and this is how I'm going to know I've made my mark and can move on, etc., and hand it on to, until you're able to. I had a journalist texting me a couple of days ago, and he was saying, I want to know why these people are running for premier. And part of the interviews I've had with people on the podcast, that's one of the questions that comes up, like, why do you actually want to do this? Now, some of them have not come on the podcast and will not be, because we have gone past the debate now. So I've sort of said, well, you had your window. But that's one of the questions we ask. And we haven't heard that from some of them in any kind of clear or compelling way. And I think if you can't answer the core question of this project that we are embarking on of leadership, what are you doing here, right? And I've just always felt very, very strongly with that. And I've always found that people who can't answer that question, it's pretty clear that maybe they're in this more about themselves than the actual project of improving this province. And that isn't to suggest they don't care about the province or don't maybe have some ideas, but it is not the central thesis to what they're doing here.
Yeah, I would say, like, to that point a little bit, Teresa, like this is a high communications bar that we expect candidates to meet. And I think it's a good bar that we expect them to meet because it's the largest province in the country. Like, you are ostensibly putting yourself up for a major executive role. And we want to know how you're going to lead. And I think it's hard to communicate necessarily like what kind of leader you're going to be in a format like this debate, by putting out a big meaty policy document, because, both like the policy stuff could have been done by your team, it's hard to know how someone leads. So people ask themselves all kinds of different questions to try and determine that, right? Like, would I have a beer with this person? Like, what kind of boss would they be? Like, do they micromanage, or are they hands off? What's their ideological bent, right? And I think we haven't seen a lot of that from any of the candidates. Like, what kind of leader are you going to be? Like, are you going to be, more like a Kathleen Wynne vibe? Are you going to be more like a Mark Carney vibe? Are you going to be more an attack dog, like a liberal Pierre Poilievre vibe? Like, what is the archetype that you're presenting, right? Like,
not getting my vote if you are.
Help me see into the future what kind of leader you're going to be when you take on Doug Ford. And I don't know that we have enough to make that decision yet.
I do want to talk about one. Well, actually, I want to talk about three things. But the first thing that I want to talk about is just because we haven't really talked about the debate performances that much. I do want to talk about and get your takes on how comfortable everybody was on stage. So I have this theory in politics that there are people at the start of the process who are very, very comfortable and then they don't grow. And then there are people who are maybe weaker, but then do grow throughout the process as they get more experience. Then there are people who are sort of maybe in between and kind of stuff like that. If I'm looking at who performed on the debate, I look at Lee, and I don't think she did a bad job, but I think she has done much better on one-on-ones. Like in our interview together, she was incredible, very, very warm. She released a video this morning post-debate that she was really, really warm in, and I think that really shows the kind of leader she can be. She wasn't that way yet on the debate stage. We should probably do some less hand moving because the close-ups are a little much to look at, a little jarring. Further out, it looked better, but so these are the things you sort of work on as a campaign. I think Dylan was incredibly comfortable on the stage for somebody who has not been in public office before, and also just in general, like he was the most comfortable person on that stage. 100%. Also very rehearsed though, and like people have different preferences. We were talking about this before we hit record. It's kind of the Obama McGinty, no ums or buts. I'm not a fan of that personally. I'm more of the sound like a real human, not like you're giving a talking point all the time. But some people do like that. So he was very comfortable. Eric looked really nervous, and I know talking to Eric for our interview, he has always felt very comfortable talking, but he's done a lot of one-on-one type media things or like on a panel or whatever. And a debate is so much different. And you could see that nervousness that he had. I thought Nav was a bit soft-spoken and maybe not as energetic as he should have been. But I think he did still sound pretty comfortable. So there's that piece, right? And then Stephanie was okay. I think her closing was a bit rough. So yeah, what are your thoughts on how they came off?
I would agree with you almost certainly. I almost wonder if like Nav's demeanor during the debate was a deliberate choice. Thinking about the fact that like the question that they asked about what's the biggest misconception about you, and he said that his answer was that he's a front runner. He obviously knows the story. I mean, obviously he does. But even bringing up the debate, like there's also this kind of thought that like, okay, I can't come off as that person. I don't want to portray that, but I don't know if that's the right call. If you're the front runner and you're good at this, be good at it. I don't think wiping the floor with your opponents is a bad thing in a debate. Obviously not like directly in a mean way, but like showing that you are the best at this. But it does kind of seem like he has so far been very timid. And I don't know if that's because he's walking on eggshells because of his past, especially his most recent stint with Rogers, or if it's, which he did not mention one time last night, despite all of his talk about his experience.
On that, right? Like, so they asked, like, what's a job you've learned from? And he mentioned like an early political job. And part of this was he became a politician at 25 and then was doing that until 2021, in which then he went to Rogers. So he couldn't reference the other job he's had than politics, right? And the other thing I was had, like, not a retail story amongst them, which I have issues with, but anyways.
But yeah, I think otherwise, I think that like Lee and Stephanie were both fine. I think that obviously they can rely on their experience in question period and like doing that professionally. Like it is kind of that stand up, make a statement, whatever.
There's the real argument for question period. Yeah. for the general election debates. There you go.
But yeah, like and Eric, yeah, he just seemed very nervous, very but at the same time, like I did feel like he held his own. He had a couple of really good points that he brought up. He was one of the only ones to actually like address some of the questions directly.
He didn't lose any of his points. Like it wasn't a case of like, oh, he went blank. It was just, you could tell he was nervous, and that's okay. Yeah.
And I mean, I get it. Like I've been not on the stage, but in the green room, and it's
I'd be vomiting, so like fully get it.
Exactly. Like it's not it's a stressful time. But it's like only half as stressful as being the leader of the party of, Ontario's going to be. So
yeah, exactly. Exactly. Jordan.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty much with you guys on the performances. Like I didn't detect like any major mistakes, except all of them in French.
Yeah. Oh my God. The French was so bad.
Like just don't, guys. It's do it better or don't do it at all. But yeah, I don't think there were any like there's nothing from that debate that's going to get clipped and like run against someone in an attack ad, by one of the other candidates in this race, right? So I think like on that, like, mission accomplished. It is the first one. So, they were getting their feet under them a little bit. And, I watched actually more of the second half of the debate. So I kind of got them as they had sort of gotten.
Good. We watched different halves.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and I thought that, they were kind of improving as they went on. Like I didn't detect any of Eric's nervousness at all. I
That's
was
interesting.
I was a little disappointed that the first part of all of his answers sounded like the first paragraph of a textbook.
Yeah.
And a lot of multi-syllable words, which I'm like, and a lot of times I was like, what are you even saying?
Actually, this is a good point. So on Twitter, Omar Khan was bringing this up, and I thought it was a good point. Shout out Omar. He was saying how like stop saying things like Bill 124, and like for the healthcare sector, yes, they do know what that means. For the general public, they don't know what a bill is in terms of the name, and even just like bills will get called something, and then there will be another Bill 124 by the time the next election comes, right? So like you gotta talk about the actual thing that it is, so people know about it. And we get jargony, we get legislative, that's not a word, but we get very, very into the world that we're in, as opposed to talking like normal people. And I would say that would be my critique of Eric. I think he's got his policies in his head very, very well, but you have to speak about them in a way that normal people speak about things, and can also understand as well. And when you're just spewing a whole pile of policy at people, it's not necessarily like, it's good that you have solutions, but you have to reach people first before they hear what those solutions are.
Yeah, and I think there also needs to be a connection between your policy prescriptions and like, where did it come from? Right? This is the whole Mamdani model of, I went out and I talked to people and I said, what about this?
See, you said that because Alex isn't here.
Wah, wah, sucks to suck, Alex. But like that's part of the, and it's part of like kind of modern communications. You go out there and you say like, hey, like we're thinking these things to improve things. What do you think about that? Get some feedback, and maybe make some tweaks, maybe add some things, maybe take some away, and then like propose that, right? Like it's you want to create a relationship with the people you're trying to govern, and because you're listening to them, build trust in them, build trust with them that you're actually going to do what you say you're going to do. And when you do that, they're going to be more excited to volunteer for you, and donate to you, and most importantly, vote for you.
Well, I think this is the thing that, we kind of were hitting on, talking about like the emotional, you have to get people to emotionally invest. And it doesn't just come down to voting for you. Campaigns require a shit ton of volunteers and a shit ton of money, all of which comes from the public. So if you're not going to inspire somebody to do either of those things, volunteer, kick in a bit of money, getting a vote for you, like you're not going to inspire people to talk about you. You're not going to inspire these third-party validators or other content creators who talk about politics like us to say, oh my God, this was so good, because you're not generating any sort of excitement about what you're talking about. Like we said before, you're just kind of reiterating the same drivel we've heard before. That was maybe a bit harsh, but you know what I mean. Especially because I've written some of that drivel before, so I should be careful.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel in a lot of ways like this is a campaign from the 2010s and not the 2020s.
Well, I guess that beats, 2 races ago when we were still stuck in 2003. So progress. I did have 2 other things I wanted to talk about and then promptly forgot them, which is a godsend for our timelines, because we do need to get going to our last section here. So we want to talk about the race ahead, what remains. So we have the membership deadline approaching again in September. Candidates are focused, in theory, on inspiring as many people as possible to join their teams. Whether that's true or not, I'm not sure. What do you think they need to do to attract more people to the party, Jordan?
Yeah, I'm recalling a similar conversation that we had about what Bonnie needed to do in order to shore up herself before the leadership vote. And a lot of it was like, we need to put some wins on the board. And I think that there's a couple of ways to do that in this campaign for candidates. One is, those like those milestones that are every couple of weeks for fundraising. That's a great one. It's one of the only measurable things that we have in the race to see, who's actually doing well or not. We'll have the membership deadline in September. That's always a big announceable for the campaigns. I think we should temper our expectations this year because of the new membership rules and people have to do that email verification. The numbers will be a lot lower than in the past. But that's usually a big announceable moment. And then give Ford a bloody nose, and be creative about it and make some noise about it. Like if that is at least 50% of the job that you're signing up for as leader of the third party is you are the opposition. You have to at least be better than the NDP. And that, so you got to pick up on what caucus has done so far and carry that forward in new and interesting ways that are going to break through the media cycle.
Zero.
Okay, so I have three things. First one, which I think goes to what I said earlier about, their ability to right now be TV ready and kind of participate in these more broadcast things. I think the first thing is spending the next 2 months meeting as many people as possible, making that personal connection, convincing people why you are the person that they should support in this leadership. And more importantly, convince them to then go tell their friends and family, the number one recommender of anything in politics, that you're good and that you should be doing it. So if you can convince more people to do that, I think that's going to be super important. Number two is, where is the digital advertising? This is a huge opportunity to be driving people. Nobody knows this. A lot of people don't even know this race is happening. People are just very uninformed right now. Again, it's the summer. No one is seeing your organic posts unless they already follow you. So you're not growing your supporters. So I would say, I took a look before we started today. The Lee and Nav are the only two people who have done any advertising on Meta, and they've spent a whopping $500 combined over the past few months.
I do want to ask you about that because you recently, in the last few years, have done a leadership campaign with presumably digital advertising during this phase of the campaign. What does that look like for those who don't know, which includes me?
So what I would say is, and this kind of goes into my third thing, and it's kind of coming up with these kind of like tent post pieces, like that you care about, that you're going to tackle, that you have specific ideas about what the problem is and what your solution is going to be. So a lot of it's going to be advertising those. It's going to be growing that email list. I know that they have access to the full list and are allowed to send like one email a month or something. But having your own list that you can, nurture as far as driving donations. But I mean, as this kind of question alludes to, the most important part right now is signing up Ontario Liberals to vote for you. So it's kind of convincing people to do that. Maybe it's getting on your mailing list and then making sure that you do follow-ups with them until they've registered as a Liberal, or advertising the sign up directly so that you can vote. I think it's just about using another tool in the toolbox. And I'm not saying they have to spend a bunch of money, because I know the race is expensive. The entry fees are super high, but they should be, in my opinion, spending some money to drive those numbers and drive awareness outside of the people who are already paying attention, which, even taking a look around Reddit, around Twitter, around Threads today, like nobody's talking about this. There was a debate last night and like there's 20 comments total talking about this on all those platforms. Like people aren't inspired. People don't know what's happening. People aren't engaged in the process. So at least with advertising, you can start to put yourself and those tentpole policies in front of people and get them to kind of at least know that something's happening, and hopefully get them to support you and sign up as an Ontario Liberal to do it.
And 10 of those were us commenting, probably.
No, of course.
I wrote myself some notes, and I'm pretty sure I peppered them into a previous answer. So there's that. I do want to ask before we go twofold. If you were to rank a ballot right now,
Ooh.
how would you do it based on the debate performance and also just in general, where you're at right now? Jordan?
Oh, good. Jordan has to go first.
I think, because we don't have very much, like all we have for published data is fundraising, as I mentioned, and endorsements, and then where candidates say they have toured. So overall, and I've been living in a little bit of a bubble. So my understanding is that like Nav's in front on fundraising with Lee close behind and then Dylan. And then in terms of tour, like I think Nav has visited the most places and Lee has visited the second most places and Dylan's visited like more places than I thought he had visited. Obviously, Stephanie just jumped in. And I know Eric's been touring as well, but I'm not sure how many. Sorry, Eric, I'm not sure how many places he's been. So I would probably say, just in terms of like who's winning, that's where I would be. In terms of performance last night, I would say if I had to pick a winner, I would pick Lee. Again, I think that, while the rest of their performances left something to be desired, like I think Stephanie and Dylan both landed some good hits on Doug, which was important. And I was a little disappointed with Nav because he was a little flat, and I was a little disappointed with Eric because I didn't always understand what he was talking about.
Right. Daryl?
So if I was ranking my ballot for the Ontario Liberal leadership, which I am not eligible to vote in as a resident of Quebec, but because it doesn't mean anything based at this point of the race, based on what we've seen. And I think what I'm going to say is it will be especially informed by what happened last night, but not necessarily wholly because of that. I would say that like I would be debating between Dylan and Lee as my number one, and the other one would be my number two. And of course, when I think about this, I'm thinking about like who would I think would do the best at winning an election or, portraying the values that I stand for. So that'd be number one. I would say Nat probably falls in number three because he was relatively unoffensive. I know the man, that's fine. Yeah. And then I don't really know a whole lot about Stephanie. Like I said, she just kind of started, and her and Eric would kind of round out my bottoms on my ranking.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because there's a lot of like in your heart what you want and then what you're rationalizing with your head, right? And like everyone who listens to this or knows me at all knows I'm, as I say, to the left of the NDP. So that's one piece of it. So, like I don't know Stephanie well, but I know her background is in finance and I expect her to be a center-right candidate within the party. I don't know broader than the party, like compared to Doug or whatever. But due to that background, like she's probably not going to be high on my list. Eric has some ideas that I like, but some ideas that I don't like and some framing that I really don't like from an inclusivity perspective. So, like I think they would be lower down for me. And then I think in the debate performance too, that they were lower down for me. Nav, I think a lot of people think it's just going to run away with it. And there's a danger for that if you are not actually getting the work done behind the scenes to actually organize up to that expectation. If you're the front runner or expected as the front runner, you need to win on the first ballot. So unless they are able to do that, that can be a problem. Now, Bonnie did end up winning on later ballots, but it was closer than I think they expected. And that is typically not always the case. We all remember Michael Ignatieff, the first time around. So, I think that's going to be the struggle for him. And I think he needs to actually say something at some point in this race. And he does not seem interested in doing that. And that could be his downfall. I think when I talk to people, they're the most surprised by Dylan because he kind of came out of nowhere. He is very polished. He's very personal. He looks like he's actually enjoying himself, which again, I think is an important thing. Like we've had this conversation on other panels we have that like, you want to know the person running for it truly loves what they're working for, right? Like when you look at Mamdani, he loves New York. When you look at Andy Burnham in the UK, he loves Manchester, he loves the UK. Like you want somebody who you truly believe loves the place that they're fighting for because they're going to fight for it as hard as possible. And I think Dylan really has that. I think Lee has that too. Like when she talks about her story in Ontario, whether it's in Southwestern Ontario or working in healthcare or, being the captain of Team Canada, all these kinds of things. Like, I very much, they all love the country. We can say that. They all love the province. But like, I think when it comes out in your narrative, that's particularly powerful. And I think Dylan has surprised a lot of people. My former boss, Chris Ballard, has endorsed him because he thought, why the hell not? Let's go with the dark horse and see what we've got going on here, because he really likes him. So I think he could surprise some people. And I don't know if that means he will necessarily win. It could mean he's really well positioned to have a good role going forward in a potential Liberal government. My main hang up, and I was talking about the head again, my main hang up with him is that he hasn't run before. He is not currently serving in some kind of role. And I remember Kathleen Wynne always talked about, she didn't put people in cabinet right away because she wanted them to figure out what it meant to be an MPP and to truly represent people first before they got, the trappings of a ministerial office, making them think they're very important and all that kind of stuff. And I think, not that I think anything would go to Dylan's head, but, I do think it's really, really important to have some of that experience before you jump into it. Having said that, as he pointed out, David Peterson had none of that experience and, did a pretty good job for his premier. So, but that is the hang up for me. And whether that's a fair hang up to have on a candidate or not that you think is doing pretty well and has some good ideas and is coming across well, I don't know.
This is going to sound weird, but I do think that like cabinet and leadership are two very different jobs.
Extremely different roles, yeah.
Right? Like, I think that leadership is much more about storytelling and interaction with people and being able to engage the public and explain yourself and also lead a team. It kind of comes down to like, there's lots of people who are good individual contributors at a company, but would be shit managers, right? Like, they are two very different skill sets. And like, I want my ministers to be really good on their file, know what they're doing, have expertise, be able to really dig in. Leadership is a very different set of qualities, and I think that that is just a different kind of lens to put on.
It is a good point, because there's been a lot of people in caucuses in the past that I've been like, you'd make a phenomenal minister, but I don't think you have the gravitas or whatever it is to be the premier. It is a different role. So, you have to think about these things when you're looking at these people, and maybe they can grow into them. And, like, I don't think Kathleen Wynne or Dalton McGuinty or David Peterson were flawless out of the gate, right? Like, obviously they worked on these things, they figured them out. So you have to think about people's potential. And that's why right now for me, Lee is pretty high up there, because when I think of what her narrative could be, I look at everything that Ford is doing and I see her as somebody who has a lot of experience in administrative excellence, which if we're seeing how the province is being dismantled and how you need an administrator to come in, it's kind of what propelled Carney into office as well, right? Like, this really competent leader who has managed a huge organization and has been able to pull it up despite, various hardships that are going on. I think Lee has that background. Now, whether her team can actually message that out of her, I think is an open question. And if it was me doing it, that's what I'd be talking a lot about. They talk about the team element a lot with the rugby story, which I think is very, very good.
And that was a really nice tee up last night too. She talked about like politics as a team sport several times. And then today that video is very much about that. Like, that was a really good, like, comms through line to be able to talk about through the debate and then have a piece of content ready to go the next day that really kind of, continues to sell that story and kind of crystallizes it in a way that more people might see, especially if you put some money behind it. But
well, and part of why it's so successful too is because she really believes it. Like, she really believes in that teamwork aspect and what that has meant in sport and what that means in government and caucus and all these things. So, and it just as a province as well. So it helps when the candidate really believes in the narrative point and can lean into it. So I think there's those two pieces. If I'm her team, I talk about administrative excellence to deal with all this corruption and incompetence we've seen. I talk about the teamwork aspect of like building One Ontario again, where we're not picking winners and losers, we're all in this together and how we float all boats. And then I talk about the third piece, which is she's an organizer who understands party politics and went from losing a race closely to then winning it after all these years of hard work with her local association in the heart of Ford Nation again. So that was what I was going to talk about before, this idea of electability, right? Like, I fucking hate that word, because like, what does that actually mean to people? And I've heard people say, well, like, oh, I don't know about this candidate, that candidate. Like, to me, winning in Etobicoke is as electable as it gets, right? Like, actually pulling off that victory is huge. And, you know, like Stephanie's also there with an elected seat, but again, that's probably one of the safest seats we've had in the province for a very, very long time. Part of that was Kathleen Wynne converting that seat. But again, we haven't lost that seat in a very, very long time. So we have these conversations, right? Like people like to talk about electability. They like to talk about likability.
Etobicoke, like if we're not winning Etobicoke, we're not winning. So
Yeah,
Etobicoke is not a hard to win, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that's a good point too, is like, who is helping us start to branch out past these different areas, right? Like we have seats in Ottawa, we have seats in Toronto, pretty much it, you know, like who is doing the things that can help us build past into these communities we need to win. When I think of Etobicoke, me and Jordan are very biased because we have worked for Etobicoke members. And when I think of Etobicoke though, like I think of Etobicoke as like suburban adjacent, right? Like it is very suburban. It's technically part of the city, but like you can start talking about Peel in that conversation. You can start talking about the 905 in that. You can start talking about Durham. Like there are things that are similar. And if I'm her campaign, I start talking about that tactical experience and knowing how to win in these kinds of communities because that's where we need to win. Nash should be talking that up too. Like he's from Peel. We need to win Peel to win elections. And he hasn't necessarily been talking about that. He needs to talk more about being an organizer for Trudeau. I don't know that he needs to say like he alone won because I think Trudeau did a lot of heavy lifting there, but you know, like talking about the actual organizing side of it and what that means on the ground, because I think people know we're pretty depleted on volunteers. They know that we're all pretty tired out, that we need new systems to actually go win elections and like talk about some of that operational stuff if you're talking to the members, especially if you're not apparently trying to outreach beyond the membership at this point, which seems to be what's happening. So that's sort of where I see them all. And, you know, people will know last time who I ranked top of my ballot at the start was not who I ranked top of my ballot at the end. It very much flipped completely. So again, there's plenty of time in this race. These things can switch up, but I do see, for me, it's a lot of like, what am I seeing so far? Who is showing growth over the course of the race? And who do I see the most potential with what we can do on narrative, on organization, who learns, all that kind of stuff. So
probably one of the best advantages of a long race is you actually have the runway to kind of see how much they can grow over these every 8 to 10 months. And if they literally don't change, then what you see is what you're going to get for the next 4 years. If you are seeing massive growth in that 8 months that seems to be continuing, then you know that there's a runway still to go there. There's more to come. They're still learning. They're still bettering themselves. And I think especially in the position, like we're not electing a premier, right? It's electing the leader of the opposition. So ultimately, that in that position, that's just going to be really important.
There's your gauntlet, candidates. Like now's your time to show us how much you can improve over the next few months until it's time to vote. And I think it's a really reasonable expectation that, you know, we should see all 5 candidates try to learn and grow and improve as they go on.
And their teams for that matter. These people are likely going to bring a lot of these folks who are working with them now into their office. That's certainly going to be part of it. So these people are also, you know, political operatives in the truest sense of the word, who also need to learn and grow and figure out their footing in a future office too.
It's a good reminder to voters and to the teams that we are all watching. So be kind to people, get back to people, treat people properly, because whoever we vote as leaders, to your point, are going to bring some of these people, and that may be the deal breaker for some voters. So again, you know, some free advice.
It's what we do here, give free advice. With a bit of shade, but nonetheless, free advice for all.
Jordan, did you have anything else?
No, I think I'm excited to see what they come up with. You know, membership cutoff, as we mentioned at the start, is September 7th for riding associations, September 25th for student clubs, and then the vote isn't until mid-November. Yeah. So that's what, September, October, that's 3 months to go before this is actually wrapped up. Lots of fundraising between now and then, party events, debates, all kinds of stuff can happen. So stay tuned.
Awesome. Great note to end on. All right. So I think we have in our plan to come back at least once more before this is all over. So you can hear from us again on who improved in the meantime. You've been listening to Progress Canada, presented by Lightbulb Narrative, a Canadian-owned company specializing in strategic communications, narrative development, and content creation. Our music today was composed by Elliot Middleton. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing to access future episodes the moment they drop. Thanks for listening.